They say to serve the Emperor is to serve eternity, to live not as a man but as a tool, sharpened by duty, stripped of mercy, burned clean of self. Yet in the endless shadow of the golden throne, even eternity rots. The air of terror itself tastes like the ash of saints, heavy with promethium exhaust and incense thick enough to choke faith itself. Every hour billions whisper the same prayer, their voices lost beneath the thrum of the throne's failing machinery. Somewhere in that sea of devotion, I was one of them, a nameless servant whose life began and ended at the will of a god too silent to hear. We believed the Emperor watched us, that every drop of sweat, every drop of blood spilled in his name added to his divine light. But the truth is less holy. To serve him is not to be seen, it is to be consumed. The Imperium doesn't nurture devotion, it devours it. I learned that on the lowest level of the administratum hives, where faith was measured not by spirit but by endurance, how long one could keep believing while the body fell apart. The Emperor does not need our belief. He needs our silence, our obedience, our surrender. And those who fail to understand that, learn the truth too late. There are places on Terra where sunlight has never touched the stone, where the air hangs thick with incense smoke and centuries of breath. Down here, beneath the endless vaults of the administratum, faith is not a fire, it is a weight. It presses on the chest until the ribs ache with devotion. The cogitators hum in their iron cages like caged saints, spitting data that no man alive can comprehend. Rows upon rows of scribes bend over parchment and cracked data slates, their spines forming a single, unbroken curve of obedience. From above we must look like the vertebrae of a great beast, feeding the Imperium's memory one word at a time. My name was once Laurus, no title, no family, only a designation burned into the edge of my work tablet, clerk 3rd grade, subdivision 12. They said to serve was glory, but glory never reached these depths. The air smelled of promethium and recycled sweat, and the only sound louder than the scratching of quills was the whisper of prayers muttered beneath strained breath. Every hour we recited the same litany: the Emperor protects, the Emperor endures, the Emperor sees, but I began to suspect, even then, that he saw nothing. The overseer, a man named Devrin, moved through the aisles with his shock baton always humming. He wore his devotion like armor, quoting scripture as he broke fingers that slowed in their transcription. Pain refines the faithful, he'd say, and the rest of us would nod, grateful not to be the one screaming. To falter was to doubt was to sin. And sin down here was recycled into labor, or servitors. The manufactoria above often demanded fresh replacements, and we all knew where those bodies came from. Each morning began before the chime of dawn, if dawn even existed beyond the ceilings of iron and smog. We were woken by hymns blaring from vox grills, recorded voices of long-dead saints distorted into static reverence. I would rise, joints creaking like rusted gears, and wash my face in grey water that smelled faintly of metal. Around me hundreds did the same, the rhythm so precise it felt mechanical. In truth, that was what the Imperium wanted us to become, cogs without question, devotion without delay. There were moments, small and shameful, when I wondered what it would feel like to stop writing, to lift my head, look past the endless scrolls, and simply breathe. But the thought died as quickly as it came. Faith does not permit curiosity. Curiosity invites sin. So I wrote, line after line, decree after decree. Entire worlds were signed into famine, or reprieve with strokes of my pen, and I felt nothing. That was the true miracle of the Imperium, not salvation but numbness. I remember one night, when the lights above flickered and the machine spirits grew restless, the air turned cold, and every scribe froze in place. Then came the hum, low, distant and deep enough to rattle bone. Some said it was the throne itself, echoing through the arteries of terror. Others whispered it was the Emperor speaking, his divine will rolling through the conduits of the world. Devrin forced us all to kneel, pressing our foreheads to the floor until the sound faded. He sees us, he said, voice trembling with zeal, but I swear, in that moment, it did not feel like we were being seen. It felt like we were being counted. At the end of every cycle, we were granted 10 minutes of reflection, a gift they called it. I would stare at the mural of the Emperor behind the prayer altar, his face carved from marble, his eyes replaced by lenses that glowed faintly gold. The paint had begun to peel centuries ago, leaving the surface cracked like dried blood. And yet, every time I looked into those lenses, I could almost feel something moving behind them, a flicker of awareness, faint but watching. It was enough to keep me kneeling. Faith, I learned, is not sustained by truth. It survives on habit, repetition, and fear. And in the deepest corners of the Imperium, fear is all that keeps the light alive. After the custodian's visit, something in the air changed. The hymns seemed louder, harsher, as if the vox grills themselves were afraid. The overseers enforced silence more strictly than ever. Even breathing out of rhythm could earn you a blow. Fear had always been a companion in these halls, but now it became the air itself, invisible and everywhere. And beneath that fear, something deeper stirred, a kind of awe that was not reverence but terror. For the first time, I began to see the Emperor not as a god but as an idea that fed upon us. The realization was blasphemy in its purest form, and yet I could not shake it. Every movement we made, every word we spoke was for him. But what if he no longer needed us to believe? What if belief itself had become irrelevant, and all that mattered now was obedience? The work never stopped. My hands were cracked and bleeding, the ink stinging my wounds as I wrote decree after decree. Through sleepless nights, my thoughts wandered to Marielle. Was she still somewhere within these walls, her voice added to the endless chorus that powered the throne? Or was she simply gone, erased, like an error on parchment? Sometimes, I caught the faintest whisper near the cogitator banks, like her voice carried through the wires, a sound so soft I could almost believe it was my mind breaking. Then, one evening, during the 10th work cycle, the power failed. It had never happened before, not once in living memory. The lights went black, the machinery stuttered, then fell silent. For a moment, there was only breathing, and the echo of hearts pounding in the dark. And then, slowly, something else, a hum, deep and ancient, rising from beneath the stone. The scribes froze. I could feel the vibration through the soles of my boots, crawling up my legs like living electricity. And in that hum, I thought I heard words. Not clear, not human, but aware. 1,000 voices speaking as one, layered over each other like echoes in a tomb. Some prayed louder, others began to weep. When the lights returned, the overseers were gone. In their place stood figures in crimson robes, tech priests of the mechanicus, their faces replaced by metal masks and blinking optics. The smell of sacred oils filled the air. One of them moved to the center of the hall, his voice distorted through a vox filter. "The throne's pulse is erratic," he said. "The Emperor requires recalibration." We did not know what that meant, but the way the priests looked at us made it clear. We were part of the equation. One by one, they began to take people away, not by force, just selection. A tap on the shoulder, a nod, and the chosen would rise without a word, disappearing through the side gates. I kept my head down, hands trembling over the parchment, pretending to write. Hours passed. Then, I felt it, a metal hand on my shoulder. I turned, heart hammering, but it was not a priest, it was another scribe, old, his skin parchment thin, his eyes sunk deep into the hollows of devotion. "You've heard it, haven't you?" he whispered, the voice beneath the machine. I tried to deny it, but my lips betrayed me. "Yes," he nodded slowly, as if confirming a suspicion that had haunted him for decades. "Then you are already marked. It calls to those who still remember what silence feels like." Before I could respond, he was gone, vanished into the lines of hunched bodies, his place at the desk filled by another within minutes. It was as if he had never existed. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hum from beneath the floor continued, steady and alive. I pressed my ear to the stone and listened. What I heard wasn't just sound. It was breathing, slow, rhythmic, endless. It was then I realized the truth that would haunt me forever. The Emperor's throne was not a machine in service to a god. It was a god made of machines, and we were its blood. Sleep abandoned me long before I understood why. I began to measure time not in hours or prayers but in the rhythm of the throne's pulse beneath the stone. It was steady now, like a heart that refused to die. The halls never returned to normal after the inspection. The overseers did not come back, and in their absence the priests lingered, silent shadows of iron and incense. Their robes whispered as they moved, their footsteps echoing in ways that felt too deliberate, too heavy, as if each one was an invocation. The scribes spoke less, the prayers grew quieter, but the hum beneath us grew stronger, a low vibration that filled our bones even when the world was still. It was no longer something we merely heard, it was something we felt, in the marrow, in the breath. Some began to change. At first it was small, the loss of color in their eyes, the pallor of their skin. Then the bleeding began, faint at first, from the nose or ears, always during worship. The priests said it was a blessing, a sign of resonance with the throne's divine current. I didn't believe them. I remember one morning when I found the scribe who had spoken to me before, or rather what remained of him. His desk was covered in symbols drawn in his own blood, perfect circles intersecting with script so ancient I couldn't read it. His body lay slumped forward, his skin gray and stretched, his mouth frozen in prayer. The priests arrived within moments. They said nothing. 2 servitors lifted his body away, while another burned the parchment with a hiss of purifying flame. But before it turned to ash, I saw the last words he had written. "We are the current." That phrase dug into me like a thorn. We are the current. I began to notice how everything, the work, the prayers, the fear, was part of a rhythm, an endless cycle of movement and stillness, devotion and despair. We were not serving the Emperor's will, we were maintaining it, feeding it. The custodes never returned, but sometimes I caught glimpses of golden light flickering in the distance, reflections perhaps, or something watching from beyond the veil of incense smoke. The thought should have comforted me. Instead it hollowed me further. Then came the ritual. We were gathered in the central hall, all 500 scribes kneeling in perfect formation. The priests lined the edges of the chamber, their chanting mechanical, their voices modulated through ancient vox chant codices. The air shimmered with heat from burning oils. The high priest, his face hidden behind a lattice of brass tubing, raised a data slate and began to recite the invocation of connection. The lights dimmed until only the gold sigil of the imperial aquila glowed above us. Then the floor opened. Beneath the stone, I saw what no scribe should ever see, veins of metal glowing faintly with liquid fire, running deep into the bowels of terror. The heat seared my skin even from a distance. The priests began to lower the chosen into those depths, their bodies strapped into harnesses, their eyes wide but unresisting. I could hear the screams echo through the ducts as the cables tightened, and the hum of the throne grew louder. We were told it was a renewal ritual, that their sacrifice ensured the Emperor's continued grace, but I knew, deep down, that they were becoming part of it, that the golden light was not merely divine, it was hungry. When the floor closed again, the air was thick with the scent of blood and sanctified oil. The priests withdrew without a word, and when we were dismissed, none of us spoke. That night I returned to my station, and stared at the cracked mural of the Emperor one last time. The gold paint had faded almost entirely now, revealing the dark stone beneath, black, cold and eternal. For the first time I did not bow, I did not pray. Instead I whispered the only truth I had left. "You are not light," I said, "you are gravity." And the hum beneath the stone answered. There are sounds on Terra that no living man should hear, sounds that belong not to the mortal ear, but to the machinery of gods. The whisper of the throne was one thing, the choir was another. We called it that not because it sang hymns of devotion, but because it never stopped. Even in sleep, if sleep still existed, its song clawed its way into our dreams. After the ritual, they took 50 of us from the scriptorium. We were told it was an honor, that the Emperor had heard our names. None dared refuse. I was among those chosen, led by priests whose faces flickered with faint light from the augmetics buried beneath their skin. We were taken down, far beneath the known levels of the palace, through corridors so narrow that even the air seemed reluctant to enter. The further we descended, the warmer it became. The stone walls sweated condensation that tasted of rust and salt. At last we reached a chamber so vast it defied reason. It was filled with rows of iron cages suspended above glowing conduits. Inside each cage sat a figure, human once perhaps, but twisted by devotion and decay. Tubes ran from their mouths, their skin cracked and gray, their eyes long gone. The air vibrated with the low, unbroken drone of their voices. This was the choir. The priest who guided us, Megos Elion, he called himself, explained in that emotionless mechanical cadence of the mechanicus. Their minds are linked to the throne's data weave. Their song maintains the psychic frequency required for the Emperor's survival. You will assist in transcription, preservation, and maintenance of the ritual order. Maintenance. That word lingered, as if this horror was no more than machinery to be oiled and cleaned. The choir sang in harmony, yet not one voice carried melody. It was a droning lament, a symphony of agony and prayer. I could feel it pressing against my thoughts, threading through every synapse like smoke. Some of the new scribes began to weep silently, their tears evaporating in the heat. Others began to mouth the words they heard, though no one truly understood them. It was as if the song burrowed into the skull, planting its meaning there by force. When one of the choir members faltered, a servo arm descended from above, injecting them with a glowing fluid that reignited their voice, or their suffering. I could not tell which. We were assigned to a platform near the choir's edge, where we transcribed the tonal sequences onto metal plates. Each note, each breath, was recorded and filed into archives deeper than memory itself. They said the song was holy, but to me it sounded like mourning, not for life, but for silence. One night while the others worked, I heard something new within the endless drone, a rhythm, faint and deliberate. 3 pulses, a pause, then 3 more. I listened closer, tuning out the surrounding hum until all I could hear was that pattern, and then between those pulses, a whisper, barely audible, yet unmistakably human. It said my name. The sound froze me. I dropped the stylus, my breath catching in my throat. The others didn't react. They couldn't have heard it. I pressed my hand to the railing, the metal warm beneath my skin, and felt the vibration again, a heartbeat within the machine, timed perfectly to my own. For the first time since I had come to serve the Emperor, I was certain of one thing: something beneath the throne was alive, and it knew I was listening. Sleep became an illusion within the choir's chamber. Time itself bent under the pressure of its endless sound. We stopped marking hours by light or darkness, for neither existed here. Only the song remained constant, a droning pulse that filled the skull until thought itself began to dissolve. We ate when the servitors brought nutrient paste. We worked when the overseers signaled, and we prayed because not praying felt impossible. There was one rule that bound us more than any commandment: never fall silent near the choir. If a scribe's pen stopped moving, if his voice stilled in mid-chant, the adepts would drag him away to attune him to the harmony. None ever returned. We assumed they joined the cages. Magos Elian passed among us each cycle, his mechanical limbs hissing softly, his optics glowed faint blue, reflecting off the sweat on our faces. The Emperor endures, he would recite, his tone the same every time, neither reverent nor cold, merely factual, as if stating a principle of physics. Your transcription ensures his will remains unbroken. But I had begun to doubt that the will was his at all. The whispers had returned. They never spoke more than fragments. My name, sometimes a word like listen or beneath. I dared not tell the others. To speak of hearing what was not sanctioned was heresy, and in this place, heresy did not lead to punishment. It led to conversion. One evening, if evening could exist in a place without sky, I saw something impossible. One of the caged singers, a woman or something that had once been one, turned her head, only slightly, but enough that I saw the wet, clouded remnants of her eyes. She looked at me. There was no voice then, only the vibration of a thought that struck through me like static. Help us. I stumbled back, knocking over a data slate. Its contents spilled across the platform, a pattern of sigils I had transcribed only hours before. The sequence matched the pulse I'd been hearing. 3 long, 3 short. I realized then that the choir's song wasn't constant chaos. It was language, coded, structured, layered so deeply within itself that only madness could decipher it. When I brought this observation to Elian, he turned those cold lenses toward me. The choir speaks in frequencies that mortals cannot interpret. You will not attempt to. His tone did not rise, but there was something in it, a warning sharpened by centuries of obedience. That night as the others worked, I found a gap in the sound, a brief silence thinner than breath. It was enough for me to hear what lay beneath the noise, a deeper resonance, not sung by the choir at all, but by the earth itself. It was not the Emperor's voice. It was older, slower, hungry. Something below the palace was listening back. The next day they took 3 scribes away. Their expressions were calm, almost peaceful, as if called by a dream. Their stations remained empty, their notes untouched, and yet when the choir resumed, I swore I heard 3 new tones woven into its rhythm, voices indistinguishable from the rest. That was the moment I understood the truth. No catechism dared speak aloud. To serve the Emperor was not merely to worship, it was to join him, piece by piece, cell by cell, until the boundary between flesh and devotion ceased to exist. Still the whisper persisted, help us. I began to wonder if obedience was truly the Emperor's command, or the plea of something else buried too deep for the light of faith to reach. Days, or what passed for them, stretched into indistinguishable echoes. The choir's tone no longer hurt. It consumed instead, wrapping every nerve in vibration until I could no longer tell where the sound ended, and I began. The other scribes spoke less and less. We had become part of the noise, extensions of it. That perhaps was the point. But the silence between each breath haunted me. In that stillness, the single pause before the next surge of chant, something waited. I felt it coiling in the dark beneath the machinery, a presence vast and hollow. When I leaned close to the grated floor, I could feel faint heat rising through it, like the breath of a sleeping beast. One cycle, while re-inking my stylus, I saw movement among the cages. A pair of acolytes descended, guided by servo lights. They carried a new body between them, limp, veiled, wrapped in ceremonial cloth. I caught a glimpse of the robes beneath, dark red with embroidered scripture. Not a common scribe. This was an adeptus ministorum priest. They placed him into an open cage and began connecting the cables to his spine. He didn't resist. He was still alive. His chest rose and fell slowly. Then the magos initiated the process. The priest's eyes rolled upward, mouth opening in a voiceless gasp as a needle pierced the base of his skull. The choir's tone deepened, adjusting to include the new voice. Something about that moment shattered whatever remained of my faith. If even the ordained could be sacrificed to the machine, what hope did any of us have? The Emperor's light was said to be fueled by prayer, but what if it was only maintained by suffering? What if faith was the fuel, and flesh the fire that kept him alive? That night I could not sleep. My pulse throbbed in time with the choir. The air stank of oil and blood, and then, a whisper not from within but from all around. A chorus this time, faint but clear. Beneath terror lies the truth. I rose and wandered to the edge of the chamber. A narrow service tunnel led downward, forbidden to all except the tech adepts. Its gate was sealed by a rusted aquila, yet as I approached, the sigil flickered, the lock disengaged with a mechanical sigh. Beyond it, the corridor descended into darkness so thick it swallowed the light of my lumen. I could hear faint metallic dripping, and beneath it a rhythm like a slow heartbeat. For the first time in my life, I disobeyed. Each step downward peeled something away, the smell of incense fading, the hymn's vibration dulling, the air growing colder and wetter. Eventually, I reached a chamber lined with skeletal remains fused into the walls, ancient workers perhaps, or the discarded faithful, their skulls faced inward, mouths open, as if eternally screaming into the center of the room. And there, standing before a rusted conduit thicker than a tank, I found carvings unlike any imperial script. They pulsed faintly when I drew near. I didn't understand the language, but the meaning struck deep. The Emperor does not feed upon our faith. He endures because of our pain. Then, for the first time, I heard a voice that wasn't a whisper. It spoke from everywhere and nowhere, vast, sorrowful, and old. He weeps, child. Even gods suffer for their creation. The sound sent me to my knees. My lumen flickered, then died. When light returned, I was no longer in the catacomb. I was back at my station, quill in hand, slate before me, the choir screaming as if nothing had happened. Only the taste of iron in my mouth reminded me that it had been real. But I knew then, I had seen what no servant should see. Days, or what passed for them, stretched into indistinguishable echoes. The choir's tone no longer hurt. It consumed instead, wrapping every nerve in vibration until I could no longer tell where the sound ended, and I began. The other scribes spoke less and less. We had become part of the noise, extensions of it. That perhaps was the point. But the silence between each breath haunted me. In that stillness, the single pause before the next surge of chant, something waited. I felt it coiling in the dark beneath the machinery, a presence vast and hollow. When I leaned close to the grated floor, I could feel faint heat rising through it, like the breath of a sleeping beast. One cycle, while re-inking my stylus, I saw movement among the cages. A pair of acolytes descended, guided by servo lights. They carried a new body between them, limp, veiled, wrapped in ceremonial cloth. I caught a glimpse of the robes beneath, dark red with embroidered scripture. Not a common scribe. This was an adeptus ministorum priest. They placed him into an open cage and began connecting the cables to his spine. He didn't resist. He was still alive. His chest rose and fell slowly. Then the magos initiated the process. The priest's eyes rolled upward, mouth opening in a voiceless gasp as a needle pierced the base of his skull. The choir's tone deepened, adjusting to include the new voice. Something about that moment shattered whatever remained of my faith. If even the ordained could be sacrificed to the machine, what hope did any of us have? The Emperor's light was said to be fueled by prayer, but what if it was only maintained by suffering? What if faith was the fuel, and flesh the fire that kept him alive? That night I could not sleep. My pulse throbbed in time with the choir, the air stank of oil and blood, and then, a whisper not from within but from all around. A chorus this time, faint but clear, beneath terror lies the truth. I rose and wandered to the edge of the chamber. A narrow service tunnel led downward, forbidden to all except the tech adepts. Its gate was sealed by a rusted aquila, yet as I approached, the sigil flickered, the lock disengaged with a mechanical sigh. Beyond it, the corridor descended into darkness so thick it swallowed the light of my lumen. I could hear faint metallic dripping, and beneath it a rhythm like a slow heartbeat. For the first time in my life, I disobeyed. Each step downward peeled something away, the smell of incense fading, the hymn's vibration dulling, the air growing colder and wetter. Eventually, I reached a chamber lined with skeletal remains fused into the walls, ancient workers perhaps, or the discarded faithful, their skulls faced inward, mouths open, as if eternally screaming into the center of the room. And there, standing before a rusted conduit thicker than a tank, I found carvings unlike any imperial script. They pulsed faintly when I drew near. I didn't understand the language, but the meaning struck deep. The Emperor does not feed upon our faith, he endures because of our pain. Then, for the first time, I heard a voice that wasn't a whisper. It spoke from everywhere and nowhere, vast, sorrowful, and old. He weeps, child, even gods suffer for their creation. The sound sent me to my knees. My lumen flickered, then died. When light returned, I was no longer in the catacomb. I was back at my station, quill in hand, slate before me, the choir screaming as if nothing had happened. Only the taste of iron in my mouth reminded me that it had been real. But I knew then, I had seen what no servant should see. The next cycle began with the tolling of the sanctum's bell, 3 hollow strikes that echoed through the metal intestines of the hive. I awoke on the cold floor beside my station, uncertain how long I had slept. My hands were blistered from the quill. Ink and blood mingled on my palms. The choir had already resumed its endless chant, but its tone now carried a distortion, a faint dissonance that wasn't there before. It was as if something beneath the harmony had begun to hum, a deeper note, hungry and vast. No one else seemed to hear it. The other scribes continued their recitations, eyes glazed, mouths moving in perfect unison. I wanted to scream, to tell them about the whisper that had led me below, about the symbols carved into bone, about the voice that had told me the Emperor wept. But even as I opened my mouth, the words died. It wasn't fear that stopped me. It was the realization that they wouldn't understand, or worse, that they might. I began to notice patterns in the hymns, subtle variations that corresponded with the flicker of the lumen strips. Certain syllables would stretch longer, as if pulled by invisible hands. When they did, the air itself seemed to warp, blurring the edges of reality. During one of these distortions, I glimpsed something impossible, a figure standing behind the magos, its outline barely human, wings of light folding and unfolding in slow rhythm. Its face was a ruin of gold and sorrow. Then the vision vanished, and I was alone again. But I could no longer deny it. The choir wasn't merely transmitting faith upward, it was feeding something downward. One by one, the other scribes began to falter. Some collapsed mid-chant, their bodies twitching as if shocked by invisible energy. Others simply stopped breathing, their flesh cooling as the servitors dragged them away without ceremony. The magos never paused the hymn, he only replaced the fallen with fresh recruits, their minds scrubbed, their eyes wide with the same reverent terror I had once carried. I could not endure it any longer. That night, as the cycle lights dimmed to crimson, I made a decision that no faithful servant should ever make. I tore the imperial aquila from my collar and pressed it to my palm until it drew blood. Then I whispered, "If he weeps, let him hear me." The ground trembled, not with machinery, but with breath. The vast conduit beneath the sanctum groaned as though awakening, and from its depths came a low moan, not mechanical, not divine, but something heartbreakingly human. I stumbled backward, shaking. The magos turned toward me at last, his augmetic eyes burning red in the half-light. "You have heard the song beneath the song," he said, his voice grinding like metal teeth. "Few survive it." He approached, slow and deliberate, each step a hiss of pistons. Do you understand what sustains him, little scribe? Every word we speak, every drop of blood, every breath of prayer, all of it becomes fuel, not for his glory, but for his endurance. I whispered, endurance against what? The Magos leaned close enough that I could see the flicker of circuitry beneath his cheek. Against death, against the silence that waits beyond the stars. You call it devotion, we call it containment. Then he smiled, a terrible broken thing, and you, child, will help contain him. Before I could react, the servitors seized my arms. I screamed, but the choir's roar swallowed my voice whole. The Magos lifted the blood-stained aquila from my hand, pressed it to my forehead, and began a chant older than any imperial creed I had ever heard. My veins burned, the air crackled, and then, darkness. When I awoke, I was still in the sanctum, but my voice was gone. My throat ached with the phantom memory of a song I had not sung. And when I turned toward the reflection in the polished brass of the machine altar, I saw cables running beneath my skin. The choir had found its newest voice. I do not dream anymore. Whatever they took from me, voice, will, perhaps even faith, left me hollow in all the places where thought once lived. I exist now as a thread in a greater weave, bound to a machine whose pulse dictates my own. The choir's chant flows through me as naturally as breath once did. I have become part of the mechanism, a vessel through which devotion circulates, transformed into energy for a God who no longer speaks. Yet somewhere buried deep beneath the rhythm, a fragment of self endures. It listens when the others cannot. It remembers. I remember terror before this, not the holy world sung about in the catechisms, but the choking sprawl of ash and ruin I once called home. The skies were black with smog and the sun was a faint ember struggling through the haze. The ground trembled with the weight of the manufacturer, their forges vomiting fire that never dimmed. We toiled for rations and prayed for absolution we would never earn. And yet, that world of pain had felt alive. Now even life itself feels mechanized. The choir's hum merges with the faint hiss of my respirator, and I can feel the metal filaments threading through my muscles tighten whenever the Magos commands it. My body is not entirely mine. Perhaps it never was. I wonder how many others like me have been reshaped into this strange obedience. How many hearts have been rewired to beat in time with the Emperor's endless suffering. Once during a maintenance interval, I caught sight of my reflection in a sheet of polished steel. My skin was pale, translucent, threaded with faint silver veins. Where my throat had been, a small vox port now gleamed. Through it my chant poured like static. I tried to stop, to force silence into existence, but the cables beneath my skin pulsed harder, forcing sound from me until tears welled in my eyes. The tears tasted of promethium and salt. And then, amid that pain came something unexpected, a whisper not from the choir but from within my own mind. It said, "You are not alone." The voice was not human. It was faint, delicate, almost sorrowful. It spoke as if it had been listening for centuries, waiting for someone to hear it again. "He sees you," it murmured. "He cannot speak through the light, but he remembers your name." For a moment I felt warmth, a pulse of something too real to be illusion, compassion perhaps, or recognition. I wanted to believe it was the Emperor himself, reaching through the veil of agony to touch one of his lost children. But another part of me, the part still capable of doubt, wondered if it was something else entirely, a remnant of what lay beneath terror, a fragment of the same ancient presence that had whispered to me in the catacombs. Days or cycles or eternities passed in that uncertainty. I began to hear the voice more often, always faint, always beneath the choir's thunder. It guided me to small acts of rebellion, a hesitation in the chant, a glance not approved by the Magos, a prayer altered by a single forbidden word. Each defiance felt like reclaiming a heartbeat, but rebellion never goes unnoticed in the sanctum. One cycle, as I faltered in my rhythm, a surge of energy shot through the filaments in my body, throwing me to the floor. Sparks danced across my vision. The Magos turned toward me, his mechanical form glinting in the candlelight. "Corruption detected," he hissed. "Neural anomaly. Containment required." Servitors approached, their metal limbs hissing with steam. The cables in my spine tightened like snakes. I wanted to plead, to explain that I was still faithful, that I still believed, but the voxport only emitted static. The Magos raised his hand and the servitors froze. His gaze lingered on me, unreadable behind the cold red glow of his lenses. "You hear him, don't you?" he said softly. "Not the Emperor as they preach, but the one who waits beneath the throne, the old light. His tone was almost reverent. I have heard it too. He turned away, his augmetic limbs moving in slow precision. Do not resist it, scribe. To serve the emperor is to suffer is to be known. You should be honored. Then he left me lying there, trembling, unsure whether I had been spared or marked. When the magos left me in that half-lit sanctum, I lay motionless for what felt like an eternity. The cables running through my flesh pulsed faintly, responding to the choir's rhythm even as my consciousness drifted. My body had become an instrument. The hum of servos where my heartbeat once was, the hiss of filtered breath where prayer should have been. And yet, buried beneath the machine's song, I could still feel something human trying to move. The whisper within me returned, softer now, like the touch of a hand across a wound. You endure, child, it said, and so does he. I wanted to ask, who are you, what are you? But the words could not leave my throat. The vox port emitted only a trembling whine. Still, the voice seemed to understand the question unspoken. They have forgotten what he was, it murmured. They think his divinity requires their agony, but he was never meant to be a god. Those words struck something deep, a forbidden thought that should have burned itself away under a lifetime of indoctrination. I remembered the murals of Terra's cathedrals, the emperor radiant upon the throne, golden, flawless, adored. But what if that image was a mask carved to hide the truth? What if the reality of his existence was not majesty, but torment, not ascension, but imprisonment? I wanted to deny it, to banish the heretical echo, but each time the choir raised its voice, I could feel his pain resonating through the wires, through the air, through my bones. It wasn't glory that powered the Imperium, it was endurance. Endless, merciless endurance. The sanctum's atmosphere thickened with incense and heat. The magos had begun another ritual, a recalibration of the neural grid that linked the choir to the throne's relay lines. He moved like a priest officiating a sacrament, whispering binary prayers as tendrils of data light slithered from his implants. The other scribes swayed, their voices blending into an ocean of sound that made the air itself vibrate. And then, in the midst of that sacred thunder, my mind slipped. The hum became something else, a map of connections, threads of pain woven across worlds. For a heartbeat, I saw beyond the sanctum. I saw the billions of souls across the galaxy crying out in prayer, each word a drop of fuel poured into a dying flame. Their devotion converged upon a single point, the golden throne. But that light was not pure. It flickered, guttering beneath the weight of centuries. Beneath it, chained within the machinery, I glimpsed a figure of impossible magnitude, not radiant but skeletal, his armor cracked, his flesh desiccated, and around him swirled countless voices, saints, psychers, martyrs, their souls burning as they sustained his broken divinity. I fell to my knees, trembling, the vision searing my mind like molten glass. The magos turned sharply. You've seen it, he said, and his tone held something between awe and fear. You've looked upon the mechanism of God. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My thoughts scattered like ash. The magos knelt beside me, his metal fingers brushing my temple. Do not mistake what you saw for blasphemy. It is revelation. The Emperor's mercy is infinite, even in agony. He shields us from the truth. But you were chosen to witness it. His hand lingered on my head as if in blessing, and I realized, this wasn't mercy. This was initiation. Whatever I had seen had marked me, changed me, just as the wires beneath my skin had. Later, when the lights dimmed and the magos retreated to his private chambers, I sat in the dark and whispered into the void. If you can hear me, my lord, tell me why. No answer came, only the faint echo of machinery, and somewhere beneath it, the softest, most human sound imaginable, a single weary breath. The following cycles blurred into a fever of sound and shadow. Sleep became a forgotten indulgence, and thought itself turned to static. The choir no longer sang hymns of praise. It howled in frequencies that clawed through flesh and faith alike. Somewhere amid that relentless storm, my mind began to slip into strange intervals where time folded in on itself. I would awaken from trance to find entire hours missing, ink stains on my fingers, and words I did not remember writing etched across the data slates before me. Words that were not in High Gothic. Words that pulsed when read. The magos grew obsessed with my altered state. He hovered close whenever I fell into those fits, muttering to himself, recording every syllable I uttered. The link is deepening, he whispered once, almost reverently. The boundary between man and conduit dissolves. Soon the message will speak through her. I wanted to resist, to scream that I was no vessel, but the vox port in my throat only stuttered with metallic distortion. And beneath that I began to feel it again, the presence that had once whispered kindness now pressing harder, not cruelly, but with urgency, as if time were running short. "Listen," it said, though not in words. The sound was like blood moving through veins, a pulse I could feel in the bones of my skull. The next vision came unbidden. The choir's harmony swelled, and suddenly the sanctum around me dissolved into radiant ash. I stood before an expanse of impossible machinery stretching into eternity, golden conduits, rivers of molten light, the walls alive with the pulse of souls, and there at its center I saw him again, the emperor of mankind, but not as the frescoes depict, not as the god in marble or flame. His body was a ruin of light and shadow, immense and motionless, held together by the machinery of devotion. Where his eyes should have been, twin voids burned, not in wrath, but in grief too ancient for mortals to comprehend. Around him swirled billions of tiny lights, the souls of the faithful, burning out as they reached his aura. He was feeding, yes, but not willingly. Each spirit that touched him screamed, and I felt his sorrow echo through me, a pain vast enough to drown whole worlds. I never wished to be worshipped. A voice thundered through the void, and the machinery shuddered under its weight. But they chained me to their prayers. The vision shattered. I collapsed to the sanctum floor, smoke rising from my skin, the taste of ozone on my tongue. The Magos was there instantly, eyes blazing. "What did he show you?" he demanded. I tried to answer, but the words came out in a rasp of static. He leaned closer, recording. "Speak, conduit, his truth must be known." And for a moment, just a moment, I felt pity for him. For all of us, we were prisoners of our own devotion, shackled by the very faith that once gave us purpose. The Emperor's light was not a gift, it was a wound that refused to close. Then the Magos said something that froze me. "Tomorrow your neural pattern will be integrated into the relay. You will become part of the throne's chorus itself." The words sank into me like ice. To be part of the throne, not metaphorically, but literally, meant death, and worse than death. To be dissolved into the song forever, neither alive nor gone, a thought stretched across eternity. That night I stared at the iron ceiling and prayed, not to be spared, not to be saved, but simply to remember myself when the time came. The whisper in my mind stirred again. "You can still choose," it said, "but choice demands sacrifice." When I asked what kind, it only answered with silence. And as I lay there half man, half machine, caught between damnation and duty, I realized something horrifying, that the Emperor and I were not so different. Both of us had been turned into conduits. Both of us had been remade to serve, and both of us in our own ways had forgotten what it meant to be free. The night before my integration, the sanctum grew quiet in a way that felt unnatural. The choir had fallen to a murmur, as if the machine itself was holding its breath. The Magos oversaw the preparation alone, his servitors moving silently through the half-light, arranging the sacred apparatus that would soon consume me. Thick cables snaked across the floor like veins, converging at the altar where the relay chair waited, a throne of wires and glass designed not for comfort, but for surrender. I sat on the floor beside it, bound by obedience and fear. My thoughts drifted like ash through static, touching fragments of memory that no longer felt like mine. The streets of terror, the smell of promethium, my mother's cracked hands lighting a votive candle for a god she would never meet. Those memories flickered and dimmed, replaced by the hum of the machinery preparing to rewrite me. The Magos approached. "You will not die," he said, almost tenderly. "You will ascend into the relay. Your consciousness will flow through the Emperor's light. You will sing in eternity." I wanted to ask, whose eternity, his or mine? But the vox port in my throat was locked, sealed by code. My silence was complete. Then the whisper returned, the same one that had haunted and comforted me in equal measure. "They do not understand," it breathed. "They think service is holiness, but service without will is only decay." The cables tightened around my wrists. My blood turned to lightning. I could feel the machine searching through me, testing every nerve, every thought. The Magos began to chant in binary, each word a pulse of light. "He cannot bear their faith," the whisper said. "It binds him tighter. The throne is his tomb, and yours." The realization hit me with perfect, unbearable clarity. The Emperor's so-called divinity wasn't salvation. It was containment. The Imperium's worship wasn't sustaining him, it was imprisoning him, feeding the machinery that kept his body from collapsing while his spirit screamed across the warp. And now, I was to become part of that prison. The Megos raised his hand. Begin integration. The servitors moved as one. The relay's clamps locked onto my spine. A surge of white fire raced through my veins, tearing through every cell until I thought I might shatter apart. My vision flooded with light, the same endless golden machinery I had seen before, alive and trembling. The Emperor loomed before me again, vast and broken, his eyes hollow suns, but this time he looked at me. You see now, the voice thundered through my skull, they made me into this, their love became my cage. I wanted to reach for him, to speak, to offer something, mercy, defiance, understanding, but I had no voice left, only the scream of circuits. The Megos' words faded behind me, replaced by the rising hum of the machine. The choir's song merged with mine, a river of agony and faith intertwining, until I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. And then, amid that blinding conflux of pain, I made my choice. I focused on the whisper, the faint ember of something still alive within me. You said I could choose, I thought. Then I choose to free him. The machinery convulsed, alarms screamed, the Megos shouted orders in binaric panic. I could feel the network of cables feeding into the relay, thousands of voices entwined through it, all connected by pain. I reached into it, not with hands but with thought, and I pulled. The choir shattered into chaos. The hum turned to shrieks. Sparks erupted from the relay's conduits. The Megos lunged toward me, but too late. The light burst outward in a storm of molten gold. And for one brief eternal instant, I felt everything, every prayer, every death, every soul, feeding into the throne. I felt the Emperor's torment, vast and silent, and beneath it all, gratitude. Then darkness claimed me. When I awoke, the sanctum was gone, only the sound of dripping water remained, and the faint, lingering scent of burnt metal. My body was no longer bound by cables. My throat was raw, but when I breathed, the air tasted clean for the first time in memory. And in that silence, a voice, not from without, but within. Angju freed me from one chain, child, it said softly, but many remain. I opened my eyes to a world remade in shadow and light. I was no longer a servant of the throne, but I was something else now, something between human and echo, between faith and truth, and far above, When I awoke again, I was no longer in the relay sanctum, nor in the steel underbelly of the mechanicus domain. I lay in a corridor that seemed older than memory itself, stone and metal fused by centuries of sacred neglect. The air was thick with the scent of oil and incense, the residue of countless rituals meant to keep the dying alive. Above me, tattered banners hung limp, each bearing the blackened sigil of the imperial Aquila. My body still trembled with the memory of light. Every movement sent ripples of static through my flesh, as if the machine within me had not yet realized I was free. I pressed my palm to the cold floor and felt it thrum faintly beneath the surface, the heartbeat of terror itself. The planet was alive, but not in the way the ecclesiarchy preached. It pulsed with industry, with sorrow, with the unending murmurs of billions living and dying in service to a throne they would never see. Somewhere far below, the relay I had destroyed still screamed through the noosphere. I could sense its dying signals like faint cries echoing through a cavern. But above that, higher and purer, another tone called to me, a hum so subtle yet vast beyond imagining. It was the same sound I had heard in the Golden Storm, the Emperor's echo. I rose, unsteady, my eyes adjusting to the half-dark. The corridor stretched ahead, illuminated by broken lumen strips that flickered like dying stars. The walls were carved with bas-reliefs depicting scenes of devotion, the Emperor seated upon the throne, his hand raised in blessing, his warriors kneeling before him in endless gratitude. Yet now those same carvings seemed to tremble in the light, the Emperor's expression shifting between serenity and suffering. "You walk the artery of devotion," a voice whispered within my mind. Few have seen these halls and lived. It was not the whisper from before. This one felt colder, older, like a memory-given thought. "Who are you?" I managed, my voice barely audible. "A fragment of faith," it replied, "born from what you broke. You unbound one chain and the echoes stir. But beware, child, the throne hungers still." The sound of boots echoed faintly in the distance. Instinct took over. I hid behind a column just as a squad of custodian guard emerged from the far end of the corridor. Their armor gleamed like molten gold, yet even beneath that divine sheen, I could feel the weight of exhaustion. They moved like men burdened by eternity, perfect, unwavering, but hollow. I watched in silence as they passed. One of them paused, his helm turning slightly as though he sensed something. For a moment, the faint blue glow of his visor met my shadowed form. My heart stilled. But after a tense silence he turned away, and they continued on, guardians of a god who no longer heard them. When their footsteps faded, I stepped back into the light. My legs trembled. I felt both awe and pity. The custodians, once symbols of divine purpose, now patrolled mausoleums of faith, each one a relic of an era when the Emperor lived, when his will moved through mortal hearts rather than through machines. The whispering echo stirred again. They do not know he suffers. They cannot. Their devotion is armor, their ignorance, mercy. I walked on, deeper into the artery. Every step carried me closer to the source of the hum. The pulse that had awakened me grew stronger the farther I went, and with it came flashes, not of memory, but of connection. Images not my own. A child kneeling before a shrine on a distant world, a guardsman whispering a prayer before battle, a mother clutching a charm of the Aquila as her city burned. All their faith flowed here, into this place, into him, and then, the corridor widened into a great chamber. It was shaped like a cathedral, yet it pulsed with life unlike any church I had known. Massive cables descended from the ceiling, each one glimmering faintly with light, as though carrying the thoughts of a billion believers. At the center stood a machine of impossible complexity, a lattice of iron and glass, humming softly in the half-dark. I knew without being told that this was one of the conduits that fed the golden throne, a vessel through which prayers became power and suffering became sustenance. As I approached, the whispering voice spoke once more. You freed the relay, and now its absence ripples through the network. The throne feels the void. He feels you, and I did feel him, faintly like warmth beneath ice. The Emperor's presence stirred at the edge of perception, no longer just a god in golden silence, but something awake, watching, waiting. I placed my hand on the conduit. It pulsed beneath my skin, a slow and steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of the divine. For a moment, I wondered if I had made a mistake. Had I truly freed him, or had I simply torn open a wound that could never heal? The machine responded with a low hum, and for an instant, I thought I heard a voice within the sound. Not the whisper, not the echo, but something greater. Come closer. The light flared, and I obeyed. The light enveloped me, not blinding but golden, as if I had stepped into the breath of dawn itself. My body dissolved at its edges, my senses stretching into impossible directions. I could hear the hum of the throne as if it were not sound, but structure, as if reality itself was woven from its vibration. I could feel the Emperor's heartbeat in every note, vast and sorrowful, each pulse echoing through the ruins of my humanity. Then the vision unfolded. I was standing in an ocean of light, yet the light itself was broken, fragmented, trembling. In every fragment, I saw the faces of the faithful, millions upon millions of souls praying at once. Their words rose like smoke, shaping constellations of devotion that spiraled upward into the abyss. Each prayer was a small offering, pure and desperate, and each was consumed by the great machinery that bound the Emperor to his throne. He was there again, not in flesh, but in presence. A figure vast beyond reason, wreathed in gold that flickered like fire about to die. His hands were bound in bands of light, each chain a strand of faith. The weight of 10,000 years of worship held him motionless, and yet his gaze fell upon me. You have seen too much, the voice thundered through the golden expanse. It was not anger I heard, but resignation, the kind of sorrow only gods could carry. I fell to my knees, trembling though no gravity bound me. Why show me this? I whispered. The silence that followed was unbearable. Then softly, the voice spoke again, because you are what they made me to be. Bound by belief, defined by devotion. You broke your chains, will you break mine? The words struck something deep inside me. I remembered the relay, the machine that had fed on thought and faith alike. I remembered the Magus words, that the Emperor's will demanded obedience, not understanding, and now here he was, asking me to undo the thing humanity had built to sustain him. How? I asked. The light dimmed, the stars of prayer began to flicker. Through silence, before I could speak, the vision fractured. I was thrown backward into the physical world, gasping, my body seizing against the conduit. Sparks leapt from the machine as alarms began to wail. Somewhere in the chamber, servo skulls ignited, their lenses turning toward me with mechanical precision. The whispering fragment of faith returned, its tone sharp now, urgent. He tests you. To silence, the throne is to silence mankind. Their prayers sustain the Imperium. Without him there is only the void. But beneath the fear, another truth pulsed through me, a truth I did not understand but could feel. The Emperor did not wish to die, but neither did he wish to endure as a god of suffering. His words were not command but confession. I stumbled backward, the chamber flickering between gold and red as the alarms deepened. Custodians would come soon, and when they did, I would not live long enough to explain, but the hum beneath the noise, that sacred pulse began to change. It slowed, deepened, like a sigh. The conduit responded to my presence, its glow intensifying. The machine seemed to know what I was about to do, and yet it did not resist. I placed both hands on the glass, feeling the current surge through me. My skin burned, my lungs seized, but somewhere inside the pain, I heard him again. Faint now, fading. If you end the song, they will forget me. Tears blurred my vision, then they will be free. The machinery screamed as I drove the charge inward. The glass cracked, golden light flooding the room like blood from a divine wound. My vision tore open, not into darkness, but into something far worse: silence. True, complete, terrifying silence. For the first time in millennia, the song of the throne faltered. Somewhere across the galaxy, I knew entire worlds would feel this moment. Priests collapsing mid-prayer, astropaths crying out as their voices found no answer, ships adrift, their navigators blinded by the absence of the Astronomicon, and in that silence, I heard something else. Laughter. Not cruel but relieved. It was his. Then the golden light went out. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on the cold stone floor of the chamber, surrounded by ruins of shattered glass and scorched cables. The hum was gone. The conduit was... Silence in the Imperial Palace is not absence. It is accusation. It fills every corridor, every shadowed hall, every relic-laden vault like a question no one dares to answer. And now, that silence was alive. It pressed against the marble and gold, like an ocean held back by faith alone. I staggered through the wreckage of the chamber, my breath shallow, the taste of ozone and iron thick in the air. The once living hum of the throne had vanished, leaving behind a void so heavy it seemed to swallow sound itself. The Magos lay beside the conduit, his augmetic limbs twitching erratically, his optics flashing dull amber. His voice, when it came, was static-laced and broken. You have severed it." His mechanical eye rotated toward me, its lens flickering like a dying star. "Do you comprehend what you have done?" I wanted to answer, but the words would not come. My tongue felt alien in my mouth. My thoughts fragmented between the echo of the Emperor's voice and the sudden, terrible quiet that followed. I looked down at my hands, blackened, trembling, and for a moment I thought I saw gold still pulsing beneath the skin. The Magos' breathing turned ragged, the sound of leaking hydraulics mingling with what might have been fear. "He is the light. Without him, humanity," he coughed sparks, "humanity will forget its shape." I knelt beside him, my voice barely a whisper. "Then maybe it's time we remembered." His optics widened in disbelief before dimming completely. The faint hum of his internal systems sputtered out, and he went still, a lifeless relic of devotion and machine. I stood alone in the chamber. The air seemed to throb, not with sound but memory. Every inch of this sanctum had once sung with ritual. The choir had howled their praises here, the servo psalms echoing through gilded walls. Now there was nothing, no faith, no fire, only the hollow aftermath of revelation. And yet, something stirred. At first it was faint, a trembling in the distant stone, like footsteps reverberating through the bones of the world. Then came the sound of metal, armor upon marble, slow, measured, inevitable. Custodians, the Emperor's eternal wardens. Their arrival was no surprise. Nothing escaped their vigilance, not even the death of a god. I turned toward the entrance just as the doors opened, their golden frames searing in the flickering light. The first custodian stepped through, his armor radiant even in the dying glow. Behind his visor, I could see no face, only the reflection of myself, small and trembling. He spoke with the calm authority of one who had never known fear. "By decree of the Emperor, this sanctum is sealed. Identify yourself." My laugh came out hoarse, raw. The Emperor gave no decree. For a heartbeat, there was stillness. Then, without a word, he raised his guardian spear. The air shimmered around him with holy power, the faint hum of his armor resonating with an energy that made the air itself ache. I could feel the weight of his intent, not anger, not malice, but duty. Immutable, unbreakable duty. He advanced, slow and deliberate. I backed away, my mind screaming for escape, but another sound broke through the quiet, a whisper, faint and fragile, like the memory of a dying flame. "Run," it said. "You have seen the truth. Let them protect the lie." I turned and ran. The corridors of the palace blurred around me, vast, endless, labyrinthine. Statues of saints and angels loomed from the gloom, their marble eyes weeping rust. Everywhere I went, I felt the pulse of the void following me, the echo of something ancient and furious shifting beneath the surface of reality. Somewhere above, the Astronomicon had gone dark. Ships across the void would now drift blind. Us. Millions of souls would cry out in confusion, their faith unanswered. But deep within me, beneath the terror and exhaustion, a single thought burned steady. The Emperor was free, if only for a moment, and perhaps that moment was enough to change everything. I reached the end of the hall, where a window of reinforced crystal showed the city below. Terror, the cradle of mankind, the monument to its own arrogance, stretched endlessly beneath a dying sky. The lights flickered across its surface like candles in a storm. The whisper came again, clearer now. "You cannot stay. They will hunt you, but beyond terror, there are still those who dream. Find them." I pressed my hand to the glass. For a fleeting instant, I thought I saw movement in the distance. Golden wings, broken but still burning, spreading across the horizon like dawn. Then the door behind me began to open again, and the silence roared. The door's hydraulic seals broke with a hiss like a dying serpent, the sound echoing down the endless marble corridor. I turned slowly, breath ragged, muscles trembling with the kind of exhaustion that eats through the soul more than the flesh. The custodian stood framed by light, towering, unyielding, gold radiance turned into flesh and armor. His spear gleamed like a shard of a dead sun, humming with stored energy that could erase me from existence in an instant. For a moment we regarded one another in silence. He represented everything I had once believed in: order, sacrifice, the Emperor's eternal vigilance. But now that order stood on the precipice of collapse, and I was the one who had pushed it there. "You have done what none dared," he said, his voice a low, measured rumble behind the vox grill. "You have silenced the throne." His words were not accusation, but mourning, a tone so human it made something inside me ache. I swallowed, forcing myself to meet his gaze, though there was no gaze to meet, only the mirrored mask of his visor. He asked me to. A long pause followed, the faint hum of his armor dimmed, as if the machine itself was listening. "Blasphemy," he murmured, though without conviction. "The Emperor does not ask, he commands." "Then why did he beg for silence?" I whispered. "Why did he show me the chains?" The custodian did not move, but his gauntleted hand flexed slightly on the shaft of his spear, a small human gesture of unease. "You speak of things no mortal can see," he said. "The Golden Throne is beyond comprehension. Its operation is not for minds of flesh." I took a step forward, emboldened by the tremor in his tone. "And yet it is minds of flesh that keep it alive. We are the ones who feed it, who burn for it." "You protect a corpse, custodian. You worship a scream." Something inside him cracked then, a stillness breaking. The air between us felt different, charged with the weight of truths that could never be spoken aloud within these walls. He stepped closer, the marble trembling under his stride. When he spoke again it was quieter, almost reverent. "Do you know what would happen if he truly fell?" I shook my head. "The warp would consume what remains of the Imperium. Humanity's soul would scatter into madness. The galaxy would drown in chaos." "You think you freed him?" His tone darkened. "You may have doomed us all." The words struck me harder than any blade could have. For a moment doubt returned, curling cold fingers around my heart. I looked past him, toward the dark corridor, the faint pulse of distant alarms still flickering like red veins through the palace walls. "Maybe," I said softly. "Or maybe you were already doomed. Maybe this was the only mercy left." The custodian tilted his head slightly, and though his expression was hidden, I could feel the weight of his gaze, not as an executioner, but as a witness. "What will you do now?" "I don't know," I said truthfully. He told me to bring silence. Maybe there are others who need to hear it. A faint hum escaped his armor, a sigh through the machine. If you leave, you will be hunted, he said. Every servant of terror will see your face in their nightmares. You will be the heretic who killed their god. I nodded. Then let them call me what they must. He lowered his spear slightly, not as an act of mercy but recognition. Go, he said. Before I remember my duty, for the first time since the silence began, I smiled, a small bitter thing. You already have, I whispered. He did not stop me as I turned and ran. The corridors stretched endlessly before me, each one heavier with the weight of history. The air smelled of burning incense and machine oil, of sanctified decay. Every step echoed like a prayer, unanswered. Behind me, the faint golden glow of the custodian faded until only darkness remained. I emerged into one of the outer halls, where tall windows overlooked the vast sprawl of terror. The sky had changed. The golden radiance that had always crowned the palace was gone. In its place hung a pale, fractured light, a sun without warmth. The city below flickered uncertainly, as though the world itself was deciding whether to keep breathing. I pressed my hand to the glass, feeling the faint vibration beneath it, the heartbeat of a dying empire. For the first time, the world felt real, vulnerable, human, and yet faintly, I could still hear him, not the thunderous voice that had filled my mind before, but something softer. You are not finished. I closed my Then guide me. No, the voice whispered.
You guide them.
When I opened my eyes again, the silence was no longer oppressive. It was a canvas, and the first sound to break it was my own footsteps, carrying me away from the palace, into the uncertain dawn of a world without its god. The streets of terror had changed. Where once there had been the constant thrum of machinery and the hymns of devotion echoing from every hab block, now there was only confusion, a silence too vast, too unnatural to be ignored. The Astronomican's beacon had gone dark, and though no ordinary citizen could comprehend its absence, they could feel it. It was in the air, a weight pressing down upon the soul, a hollow where certainty used to live. I moved among them, cloaked in the soot and shadows of the lower hives. The skies above were clouded with ash. The golden light that had bathed the world for 10,000 years now dimmed to a sickly hue. Workers stumbled through their routines, priests shouted prayers into dead vox altars, and astropaths wept blood as their minds clawed at an empty void. The entire planet breathed like a dying beast. I kept my head low, my face obscured by the hood of a tattered robe I had taken from a corpse in the corridors above. The body had still been warm when I found it, a tech adept, perhaps one of the choir's attendants, eyes burned out by exposure to the silence. He had died with his lips moving, whispering the last fragments of a creed that no longer answered him. I buried him beneath a pile of broken cables before leaving the sanctum behind. Everywhere I walked, the people asked the same questions in trembling tones. Why has the light gone out? What sin have we committed? Has the emperor turned his face away? No one dared speak the possibility that he was gone, not truly gone, but sleeping, or silent, or worse. Fear was a living thing now, crawling through the city's veins, infecting thought itself. I reached the edge of the manufacturum district, where the air turned thick with promethium fumes and the hum of reactors trembled beneath my boots. The great chimneys still belched smoke into the sky, but even here the rhythm was wrong. The machines hesitated, their precision faltering, as if the mechanicus itself had lost its guiding pulse. The cult engines were accustomed to routine prayer and binary benediction, but now, with the emperor's will no longer flowing through their circuits, even the omnissiah's servants faltered. I paused before a wall where propaganda once shone bright, a mural depicting the emperor upon his throne, his golden aura illuminating ranks of the faithful. Now that light was gone, leaving only flaking paint and the ghost of color beneath grime. Someone had scrawled words across it in hurried strokes. The god bleeds. I traced the letters with my fingers, feeling the tremor of disbelief still clinging to the words. It wasn't blasphemy, not truly. It was hope disguised as heresy. A desperate attempt to make sense of the impossible. As I turned away, a child's voice called from behind me. Do you know why he's quiet? I froze. The voice was small, uncertain but curious, the kind of tone the Imperium had long since taught its children to suppress. I turned to see a thin boy standing beside a water recycler, his clothes ragged, his eyes wide and bright with something that almost looked like courage. No one hears him anymore, the boy said. The priests just keep shouting louder. I crouched to meet his gaze. Maybe they were never really listening. I said softly. He frowned, confused. Are you one of them? Not anymore. The boy studied me for a moment, then looked toward the sky. My mother said the Emperor talks through dreams, but now, no one dreams. I wanted to tell him the truth, that the silence he feared was the same silence that might one day save him. But the words caught in my throat. Some truths were not yet ready for the world. Instead I said, sometimes the gods stop speaking so we can learn to find our own voice. He tilted his head, considering this. Then maybe he's letting us talk first. A faint smile ghosted across my lips. Maybe he is. The boy nodded, then ran off into the haze, his laughter thin but real, the first sound I had heard all day that felt alive. I watched him vanish into the smog, and for the first time since the throne went dark, I felt something stir within me. Not faith, not guilt, but possibility. The silence of terror was not the end of all things. It was the first breath of something new, fragile, uncertain but real, and somewhere deep below, beneath layers of gold and stone, the throne still slept. Its machine heart was quiet, but not dead. Not yet. Days passed, or what passed for days on Terra, and the silence deepened. Vox relays flickered and died, astropathic choirs screamed themselves into madness, and the ecclesiarchy declared the phenomenon a test of faith. Processions filled the streets, candles flickering in the smog as millions knelt before empty shrines. They begged for guidance, for forgiveness, for anything. But the sky gave no sign. I moved among them like a ghost. Each face told the same story, devotion teetering on the edge of despair. The once holy spires that had sung with sermons now rang hollow with echoing hymns. Even the adeptus custodes, those golden warriors of legend, stood motionless outside the palace gates, their halberds crossed, their expressions unreadable. To the common man, they were statues of faith. To me they looked like tomb guardians, waiting for something that would never return. Inside the cathedrals, chaos festered quietly. The confessors shouted of purging doubt. The ministorum demanded sacrifice. In one plaza, I saw a preacher set himself aflame, claiming his death would reignite the Astronomican's light. The crowd watched in silence as his body burned, their eyes reflecting the fire that failed to reach the heavens. Still, somewhere beyond all that madness, rumors spread, whispers of strange lights seen in the ruins beneath the imperial palace, a pulse beneath the stone. Some claimed it was the throne's heart stirring again. Others said it was something else entirely, something older. I followed the whispers. Down through forgotten tunnels, past collapsed maintenance shafts and rusting aqueducts that hadn't seen light since the Unification Wars. The deeper I went, the more I felt it. Not sound, not energy, but a vibration that moved through the bones of the world itself. Then I saw it. A vast chamber, buried beneath strata of golden stone and mechanicus latticework. The air shimmered, heavy with ozone and something like breath. At its center was a fracture, a hairline crack running through the marble floor, glowing faintly with amber light. The kind of glow you could almost hear, like the murmur of a sleeping giant. I knelt, placing my hand against the stone. The pulse beneath it was slow, but steady, alive. My thoughts raced. Could it be that the Emperor still lived, not through faith, not through fire or machine, but through something deeper? Had his silence been a withdrawal, not an end? Before I could answer myself, the air changed. A low hum filled the chamber, like the first tremor of thunder across a distant plain. Dust lifted from the ground. Symbols along the walls flickered in patterns too complex for my human eyes to follow. And then, faint but unmistakable, came a whisper. Not in words, not in sound, but in meaning. It begins. The voice wasn't divine. It wasn't even familiar. It was vast, cold, and old. Older than Terra's faith, older than the throne itself. It moved through me like a blade made of memory, slicing through everything I had believed. The ground trembled once more, then stilled. The light faded. The silence returned. But something had changed. The Emperor might not have spoken, but something else had. And whatever it was awake now. I stumbled back from the glowing fracture, my breath ragged in the charged air. The whisper had dissolved into silence, yet its echo clung to my mind like frost. It begins. The words reverberated through thought and flesh alike, as though something had branded them into my very marrow. For a moment I could taste the metallic tang of blood and ozone on my tongue, a flavor that felt ancient, older than language. Above me, the faint amber pulse beneath the marble continued, steady as a heartbeat. I should have been relieved. I should have fallen to my knees in reverence and cried out that the Emperor lived. But reverence was gone now, burned out of me by fear and wonder alike. This was no miracle of the Lectitio Divinitatis, no scripted resurrection whispered by trembling priests. This was something raw, primal, alive in a way that defied even mechanicus logic. A sudden shudder rippled through the chamber. The light guttered. I turned and saw, half concealed by the gloom, a figure standing at the far end of the hall, draped in the robes of a custodian, though his armor was cracked and dulled with centuries of dust. His helm was missing, his face as still as marble, yet his eyes glowed faintly with that same amber hue. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice flat and reverent, like a prayer spoken by a dead man. "I heard something," I managed. "He, the Emperor." The custodian raised one hand. "Do not name him here. The walls remember too much." He moved closer, his steps soundless despite the weight of his armor. The glow beneath the floor brightened, pulsing in rhythm with his movements. For a heartbeat, I wondered if it was reacting to him, or if he was reacting to it. "You felt it too," I whispered. He nodded, slowly. "We all have." Across the palace the custodes stand motionless, the psychers weep blood, the mechanicum whispers of anomalies in their augurs, and still the ecclesiarchs sing louder, as though their noise could drown it out. Something beneath terror stirs. Is it him? His gaze lingered on the glowing crack. If it is, he is not as he was. The air grew thick again, the faint vibration returning, crawling through my bones. It was almost inquisitive, as though the thing below the stone were aware of us, measuring us. I could feel it pressing at the edge of thought, testing the boundaries of consciousness. Then, without warning, the custodian fell to one knee, his gauntlets slammed against the floor, his voice breaking into a rasp of pain. Lines of amber light crawled up his arms, searing through the sacred sigils etched into his armor. His eyes flared, then dimmed, leaving only smoke and silence. I backed away, trembling. Whatever essence had moved through this place was still hungry, still searching, and in that instant I understood the terrible truth. Maybe the Emperor was not dying. Maybe he was changing. Maybe the Golden Throne, that machine of salvation and torment, was never a prison at all. Or maybe it was a cocoon, and the thing that whispered beneath terror's bones was not a god reborn, but something new and unknowable, and very much awake. I fled the chamber before the amber glow could reach me. The tunnels twisted like veins, pulsing faintly with that same buried heartbeat. The hum followed me through the dark, not as sound but as sensation, a low thrumming awareness that seemed to move with me, around me, through me. I no longer knew where the walls ended and where my mind began. By the time I surfaced into the lower manufactorums, the air tasted like metal dust and decay. The power grids flickered. Servitors lay motionless at their stations, frozen mid-task, their augmetic limbs twitching as though receiving signals from some unseen source. In the distance the Vox system screamed and fell silent, repeating the same distorted phrase in binary bursts I couldn't decode. The people had begun to gather, refugees from the upper hives, preachers from the shrines, scribes from the administratum, all drawn by something they couldn't name. They filled the corridors and plazas, their eyes empty but their voices unified in a single murmur, a sound not of words but of response. As if the planet itself had spoken to them in a language only the soul could hear. I watched as a child, no older than 10, raised her hand toward the sky. The air shimmered around her fingers, faint amber light spilling from her skin like smoke. The crowd gasped but did not recoil. They began to imitate her, lifting their hands, whispering in unison. Then the ground trembled again, deeper this time. The quake rolled through the foundations of terror like the breath of a slumbering god. In that moment, I understood the scale of it. This was no isolated awakening, no miracle confined to the throne. This was planetary. The pulse I had felt below the stone was now in the air, the water, the circuitry. The Emperor's realm was resonating. From the high towers to the deepest crypts, every living being felt it, a call written not in sound but in instinct. Some fell to their knees and wept. Others tore at their flesh, unable to bear the ecstasy or terror of what they sensed. The mechanicus broadcast emergency liturgies, invoking the Omnissiah, but their canticles faltered mid-chant. Even the custodes, those eternal sentinels, were reported to have turned their gaze skyward, motionless as statues. And then, the Astronomicon flared. For the first time in living memory, its blinding beam dimmed, not extinguished but withdrew, folding inward like a dying star. Astropaths across the Imperium screamed as their link was severed, their minds seared with visions of fire, light, and the shadow of wings too vast to name. The Emperor's guiding flame had not gone out, it had moved, but where? Rumors would say later that a second light appeared beyond the palace walls, low on the horizon, like dawn seen through the dust of millennia. Some swore it was the Emperor's spirit, finally freed from the throne. Others whispered it was something that had taken his place, something that looked through human eyes and found them wanting. The crowd before me stared at the faint glow in the distance. No one spoke, no one breathed. For the first time since the age of strife, terror felt truly alive and utterly terrified. In that silence I realized that history had just turned a page. Whether we had witnessed the rebirth of a god or the birth of something else entirely, none could say. But I knew this much: the Imperium would never be the same again. In the weeks that followed, terror existed in a kind of haunted stillness. The air was heavy, as though the planet itself were holding its breath. The light that had appeared on the horizon persisted, faint, unwavering, neither rising nor setting. It hung above the ruins of the city like an eye, watching, patient and unblinking. No one dared to name it. Not the priests, not the scholars, not even the high lords. To name it would be to claim to understand it, and none of us did. I moved among the ruins of the lower hives, among the remnants of those who had heard the pulse. Their bodies were whole, but their minds were elsewhere. Some murmured prayers in binary tongues, others etched sigils into stone, patterns that repeated in maddening precision. And when I closed my eyes, I could still hear it, that deep, rhythmic thrum beneath the world, faint but constant. It had not stopped, it had merely gone deeper. The ecclesiarchy declared it a miracle, the mechanicus called it a data anomaly, the custode said nothing at all. Each faction clung to its fragment of truth like a weapon, desperate to define what could not be contained. But in the silence between proclamations, something else grew, a quiet collective fear, because none of them could reach him anymore. Not through prayer, not through machine, not through sacrifice. The Emperor's voice was gone, or, perhaps, it was listening. One night as I walked the shattered promenades near the palace's outer wall, I found the sky different. The stars, what little could pierce the smog, seemed sharper, nearer. The Astronomican's dimmed light flickered once, twice, and then stabilized, but it felt altered, colder somehow, and in that dim half-light, I saw movement above the horizon. A silhouette, vast, luminous, unfolding across the dust-laden sky. For an instant, I thought it was a ship breaking orbit, but no vessel could move like that, too fluid, too deliberate. The light bent around it as though space itself were yielding. I blinked, and it was gone. Perhaps it was nothing, perhaps it was everything. When dawn finally came, if it could still be called dawn, the sky was the color of ash and molten gold. The light on the horizon faded, leaving only the memory of warmth. People began to speak again, hesitantly, their words brittle and unsure. They said the Emperor had shed his mortal confinement. They said terror had become his tomb and his cradle both. They said humanity had entered a new age. I don't know if any of that is true. All I know is that the silence that followed felt vast enough to swallow eternity. The world continued, factories reignited, the ecclesiarchy's sermons grew louder, fleets still launched from orbit, but there was an absence now, a missing heartbeat at the center of everything. The Emperor's golden shadow still hung over us, but no one could tell if it was cast by light or by flame. I returned to my quarters, the same cramped cell beneath the basilica walls. The air was stale, the candlelight weak. On the desk lay a single relic, a scrap of parchment, old and brittle, bearing a sigil I did not recognize. It pulsed faintly with amber light, and as I touched it, the hum returned, gentle and familiar. It wasn't gone after all. It had merely changed shape, become something that could not be seen, only felt. Perhaps that was the truth all along. The Emperor was never meant to speak to us as a man. He was meant to be heard as a pulse, the rhythm of persistence, the defiance of extinction. And so I sat in that flickering light, listening once more to the heartbeat beneath the stone, wondering if, somewhere beyond the veil, he was listening back. Because in the end, that is what it means to serve the Emperor of mankind. Not to understand him, not to see him, but to endure. To live in the space between devotion and silence. To carry the light even when you cannot feel its warmth. and as the last candle guttered out, I whispered a prayer that no one would ever hear. May his silence be mercy.